Hi, everyone. So we're going to talk about ecology today. And the first thing you should understand, ecology is the study of living things and how they interact with the environment, right? So this first picture here is of the levels of ecology, how you level and understand and group things, right? In science, that's what we do. We group things together. So the lowest level of organization in ecology, in the study of ecology, is the individual, right? One organism. Okay? If you have a group of the same organism, the same species of organisms, you have a population. Well, populations don't live on their own by themselves with nothing else. They oftentimes live with other organisms. And when you talk about the other organisms in a given area, we talk about the community. Finally, if we add the other things that are in that area, the non-living factors, these are the biotic or living factors. These are the abiotic, the other things are the abiotic factors, the air quality, the soil type, the weather that you get on a particular day, whether it's a mountain region or a lake region. All of these things come into play in an ecosystem. Above that, we have very particular types of ecosystems. And by the way, ecosystems can be defined very largely or very, very small. It's a very loose definition depending on what the scientist wants to look at or study. But then there are very particular ecosystems which are called biomes. And biomes are defined by having a certain climate. For instance, a desert gets very little rain throughout the entire year. And that makes it a certain type of place, right? Lots of sand, organisms that have to prevent water loss, those kinds of things, versus a tropical rainforest, which gets a lot of rain and is in the temperature range of 80 degrees per year. So those are the kinds of things that define the different biomes, versus a tundra, which is a frozen desert. Again, very little rain, but also very cold, right? And then finally, we have the biosphere, right? Bio, living, sphere, giant round thing, the earth, right? So these are the levels of organization in a community. So besides that, it's important to understand how living things are connected to one another. And the first way to understand that is to understand what food chains are. If you look at these examples, food chains are linear relationships, one to one to one to one to one. And that's why they call that a chain, because chains have these little links and everything is just linked to one other thing. So in this case, I can see there's corn, a mouse, and an owl. The arrows are flowing in this direction, which is kind of weird because I'm saying, wait a second, corn doesn't eat the mouse. The mouse doesn't eat the owl. It's the other way around. You have to remember that in both food chains and food webs, the arrows show the direction of energy. That when the owl eats the mouse, the energy from the mouse is used by the owl or flows into the owl, whereas when the mouse eats the corn, the energy flows into the mouse. So these linear relationships are food chains. In addition, we have food webs. And the difference is the webs, there's lots of connections. So the rabbit doesn't have does have a one with the grass and a one with the hawk. So this is a food chain if I want to look at just this one set of relationships. But the rabbit really within this biome, this desert ecosystem, has many connections. It has a connection with the star cactus and with the grass and with the hawk and with the rattlesnake. And everything has relationships with the bacteria because the bacteria are decomposers. And remember, every living thing will die. It's one of the characteristics of all living things. And so when they die, they get broken down by these decomposers and their organic materials return to the earth, which will then become nutrients for these producers down here at the bottom. Notice I didn't say food. Autotrophs, producers who produce food, will make their own food. So they use sunlight for that in the process of photosynthesis. But all organic things turn into nutrients that are needed by these things that are not food. Some carbon, specifically nitrogen. Nitrogen gets returned to the soil, and that's a very, very important element for all living things. Okay? So we can also pick out the different levels. There's some different names here. These are all called producers because they produce their own food, and anything that eats something else is a heterotroph, gets its energy from eating other things, but they're also called consumers. So we have different levels of consumers. If you are a first level or primary, which means first level consumer, you eat the producers directly. Okay? If you are a second level consumer, you eat the consumers that eat the producers, right? So like the lizard eats the grasshopper, which eats the producers. And then if you are a tertiary top level consumer, you eat the other consumers below you. Okay? So those are some of the levels and connections in biomes or food webs. It's important to understand too that when one organism is affected, it affects the others. For instance, if for some reason there was a disease in this community and the rabbit population decreased, that certainly would affect the hawks, which would affect the kangaroo rat and the lizards. So the hawks would certainly try to compensate and try to eat more lizards and kangaroo rats, which would then increase the population of the star cactus, which would then, help. Well, I guess that's it. But so anyway, it's important to look at all these different relationships and understand how one organism affects another in the food web. Another important graphic organizer is the energy pyramid. Notice there are no arrows, there are no levels. Sometimes you see these with the organisms in the pictures, which is nice to have. But I particularly like this graphic because it shows the really important part of the energy pyramid, which that there is a lot of stuff at the base and very little things at the top. And that's because the energy that's captured by the sun, which is the origination of all energy for all ecosystems, food chains, food webs, because the producers use the sun to make their food, is captured in this first level. But once we start to eat these things from level to level, we lose a lot of energy. We only get a 10% transfer of energy between each level. And so where's the energy going? It's lost as heat. Every organism has metabolism, which is the chemical processes that are happening in your body to grow new cells, to make energy, to repair, to replace, okay, to develop. And so this energy, it's not an efficient process, and so heat is lost. Humans, we give off 98.7 degrees heat all the time. You have certainly felt that if you've ever been in a crowded room with lots of people. It gets extremely warm. And this other nice thing is that it just shows you, again, everything returns as decomposers who recycle nutrients, not food, to the producer section. It's important to understand that every organism has a niche in its environment. Okay, so this is nice. These are the angry birds. So this is not a real niche, but it is a nice graphic that shows that everything has its place. So if the yellow birds were going to live in the top of a tree and nest here, and the red birds decide to pick the middle of the tree, and the blue birds decide to pick the bottom end of the tree, these would be niches. And niches are great because they help organisms avoid competition for food, other resources, living space, and also less competition for mates and things like that. So niches are very, very important, and they help lots of organisms be able to live in a place. Every organism has a niche, does unique things, has unique adaptations which have developed through millions of years of evolution and allowed them to cohabitate in the same kind of environment or ecosystems. So organisms have different names depending on what they eat. So we've already heard about autotroph, heterotroph, but here are some others. If you're a herbivore, it means you only eat plants, and here's some examples of those animals. If you're a carnivore, you only eat meat, and here are some examples. And if you're an omnivore, you eat both, and humans are in that category. Okay? And one of the other term left out here are scavengers. Scavengers eat dead leftover things like a vulture, right? A lion might go ahead and, kill some game like an antelope and then eat that, but there's going to be some leftover pieces on the bone and thing, and that's where the scavengers come in, who are different from the decomposers, who will actually break the dead things down when even the scavengers are done. So one last thing to understand about ecology and ecosystems are the symbiotic relationships, the close relationships between organisms. This is an example of mutualism. This flower and this bee are helping each other out. The honeybee is getting nectar from the flower, which will be food for itself and for the hive when it brings it back. And they can make honey and things. And the flower gets its pollen transferred. This bee is picking up pollen. You can see the yellow on its legs. It's picking up pollen on its legs, which is the male reproductive cell of the flower. And then we'll bring that to other flowers and deposit them onto the female parts. And so we have pollination, which will lead to fertilization, which will lead to seeds and new plants. And so some flowers really depend on this and can only pollinate and reproduce this way. Matter of fact, on Long Island, it's been such a problem because the honeybees have really diminished that farmers will actually pay people to bring their hives to their property, and they move them around so they can have the honeybees and other types of bees to help pollinate the plants so that they can grow their crops. This is an example of parasitism. We've all had this happen. We've been bitten by a mosquito. The human is the host. The mosquito is the parasite in this parasitic relationship. And you can see that the mosquito has gorged itself on blood because it has inserted its long needle-like mouth into the human skin and is taking blood from the skin from the human, which is hurting the human. Taking your blood is harming you. So this is a parasitic relationship. The last symbiotic relationship I want to talk to you about is this one here called commensalism. In commensalism, one organism's helped, but the other organism is neither helped nor hurt. So in this example, the cattle are not being helped by this bird. This bird, however, is certainly being helped by the cattle because other organisms are less likely to mess with it being around this giant animal. Okay, so the bird is helped because it gets protection, gets view from predators, and the cattle gets no help whatsoever. It's not harmed by it, but it certainly can't get the bird off of its back.